The dining room of the Grand Sterling Hotel held the kind of quiet elegance that money whispers rather than shouts. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over white tablecloths, and the gentle clink of silverware provided a soft rhythm to the evening. Richard Morrison sat at his usual corner table reviewing documents between courses as he had done every Thursday evening for the past 15 years. At 62, Richard had built an empire in commercial real estate. His silver hair was impeccably combed back, and his navy suit spoke of old money and careful decisions. He was a man who valued order, precision, and the comfortable predictability of routine. The Grand Sterling had been his late wife Catherine's favorite restaurant, and eating here kept him connected to her memory in some small way. The wait staff knew him well. They knew he preferred his water with lemon, that he always ordered the grilled salmon, and that he appreciated efficiency over conversation. He was polite but distant, the way wealthy men often become when the world treats them with constant deference. That Thursday evening started like all the others. Richard had just finished his salad when he noticed the new server approaching his table. She was young, probably in her early 20s, with her dark hair pulled back neatly and an earnest expression on her face. Her name tag read Natasha. She refilled his water glass with practiced care, but he noticed her hand trembling slightly. New employees often seemed nervous around him, though he couldn't quite understand why. He had never been unkind to service workers, just businesslike. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Natasha asked quietly. "No, thank you," Richard replied without looking up from his papers. But Natasha didn't move away. Richard could feel her presence lingering beside the table. After a moment he glanced up with a hint of impatience. The young woman was staring at him, not rudely but with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Her eyes had filled with tears. "Is something wrong?" he asked, keeping his tone measured. Natasha seemed to gather her courage. Her voice came out soft but steady. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't mean to be inappropriate, but I noticed your hand. That birthmark on your palm." Instinctively Richard closed his right hand. The birthmark was something he had carried his whole life, a distinctive circular pattern in deep rose color right in the center of his palm. Catherine used to trace it with her finger and call it his personal constellation. After she passed he had become self-conscious about it, a reminder of the intimate moments he no longer had. "I'm sorry," Natasha continued, her words coming faster now. "It's just that my father had the exact same birthmark. In the exact same place. I've never seen that on anyone else." Richard felt something cold settle in his chest. He looked at the young woman more carefully now, really seeing her for the first time. There was something about the shape of her eyes, the way she held herself. "Your father," he repeated slowly. "Yes, sir. He passed away 3 years ago. Samuel Jenkins. He worked in construction most of his life." Natasha's voice wavered, but she kept going. "He told me once that birthmarks like that were rare. He said it was like carrying a piece of the universe in your hand." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He had said those exact words to someone a lifetime ago. The dining room seemed to tilt slightly and he gripped the edge of the table. "Samuel Jenkins," he whispered. 40 years ago Richard Morrison had been someone else. He had been Ricky Morrison, a 19-year-old kid from the wrong side of Philadelphia, working construction jobs and dreaming of something bigger. He had fallen in love that summer with a girl named Dorothy Jenkins who lived in his neighborhood. She had a smile that could light up the whole block, and she believed in him when no one else did. But Richard's father had other plans. The Morrison family had old money and older expectations. When Richard told his father about Dorothy, there had been a terrible fight. His father made it clear that Richard would be cut off completely if he continued the relationship. At 19 Richard had made a choice he regretted for the rest of his life. He had broken things off with Dorothy and gone to business school in Boston just as his father wanted. He had tried to forget Dorothy, had tried to convince himself it had been puppy love, nothing more. Then 2 years later he heard through old neighborhood connections that Dorothy had married a man named Samuel Jenkins, a good man who worked in construction. Richard had felt relief and regret in equal measure. Over the decades Richard had built his fortune, married Catherine, who was from the right family, and lived the life his father had mapped out for him. Catherine had been kind and steady, and he had loved her in his own way. But there had always been a small locked room in his heart where Dorothy still lived. Now, sitting in the Grand Sterling Hotel, Richard looked at Natasha and saw Dorothy's eyes staring back at him. The realization crashed over him like a wave. "How old are you?" he asked quietly. 23, sir. Richard did the math in his head. The timeline fit perfectly. Dorothy had married Samuel about 8 months before Natasha would have been born. Your mother, he managed to say. Is she? Dorothy Jenkins. She's still in Philadelphia. She works at the library now. Natasha was watching him carefully. She never talked much about her life before she met Dad, but I found some old photos once. There was one of her with a young man. On the back she had written, Ricky Summer 1983. When I asked her about it, she just said it was an old friend. Richard felt tears burning in his eyes, something that hadn't happened since Catherine's funeral. Samuel was a good man, I hope. Natasha's face softened into a beautiful smile. The best man I ever knew. He taught me how to read, how to ride a bike, how to stand up for myself. He worked hard every day to give us a good life. He never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. When he got sick with cancer, he held my mom's hand and told her she had given him the greatest gift of his life. He died telling us both how much he loved us. The simple dignity in her words made Richard's throat tighten. Samuel Jenkins had been the father that Richard himself should have been. Samuel had raised this remarkable young woman with love and patience. Samuel had held Dorothy through the years and made her happy in ways that Richard's money and position never could have. Why did you tell me this? Richard asked. About the birthmark. Natasha looked down at her hands. I almost didn't. But I've been working here for 3 weeks and I've watched you, sir. You eat alone every Thursday. You're always working, always busy. You seem so separate from everything around you. And when I saw that birthmark, I thought about what my dad always told me. He said we're all connected in ways we don't understand. He said the universe puts people in our path for a reason. Richard sat very still. This young woman who didn't know the whole truth was offering him something precious. Not forgiveness, because she didn't know there was anything to forgive, but something else. A kind of grace. Your father sounds like he was very wise, Richard said softly. He was. He also said that it's never too late to choose kindness over pride. That love is the only thing we take with us when we go. Natasha wiped her eyes. Quickly. I'm sorry, sir. I shouldn't have said all this. I'll get your dinner. Wait. Richard said. Please sit down. Just for a moment. Natasha glanced around nervously, but the restaurant was quiet and she pulled out the chair across from him. Richard looked at this young woman who might be his daughter, who might carry half his DNA, but who belonged entirely to the good man who had raised her. He thought about all the years he had spent chasing success, building towers of steel and glass, while Samuel Jenkins built something far more valuable. I knew your parents, Richard said finally. A long time ago. Your mother Dorothy and I grew up in the same neighborhood. And I heard about Samuel, though I never met him. People said he was a good, honest man. Natasha's eyes widened. You knew my mom. I did. Very briefly. But I'm glad she found happiness. I'm glad she had someone like Samuel. Richard paused, weighing his next words carefully. And I'm glad they had you. They sat together in the warm light of the restaurant, two people connected by threads of chance and choice. Richard didn't tell her the whole truth. That was a burden she didn't need to carry. Samuel Jenkins had been her father in every way that mattered, and Richard wouldn't diminish that. But something shifted in Richard that evening. After Natasha brought his dinner and moved on to other tables, he sat thinking about the life he had lived and the life he might have lived. He thought about Dorothy, who had loved him once and who had built a good life with a good man. He thought about Catherine, who had deserved more of his heart than he had given her. And he thought about all the years he had spent alone at this table, working through dinners while the world moved around him. Before he left that evening, Richard spoke to the restaurant manager. He set up a scholarship fund to be administered through the Grand Sterling for employees pursuing education. The first recipient was Natasha Jenkins, who wanted to become a teacher like her father had always encouraged her to be. Richard also did something else. The following week he drove back to Philadelphia for the first time in decades. He went to the public library, and from a distance he saw Dorothy behind the circulation desk. She had gray in her hair now and reading glasses perched on her nose, but her smile was the same. He didn't approach her, didn't disrupt the life she had built. He simply stood there for a moment, sending a silent wish for her happiness across the years. Then he drove back to his city and his life, but something had changed. He started volunteering at a youth center, teaching business skills to kids from neighborhoods like the one he had left behind. He reached out to old friends he had lost touch with. He began really talking to people, to listening to their stories. And every Thursday evening when Natasha was working, he would ask about her classes, her dreams, her life. He became something like a mentor, offering advice when she asked for it and mostly just being present. He never told her the truth about the birthmark, about the summer of 1983, about the choice he had made. That secret remained locked away. But in listening to her stories about Samuel Jenkins, the man who had taught her about kindness and integrity and love, Richard found a kind of redemption. He couldn't change the past, couldn't reclaim the years he had lost. But he could honor the memory of a good man who had been a better father than Richard ever could have been. Sometimes late at night, Richard would look at the birthmark on his palm and think about what Samuel Jenkins had told his daughter. We carry pieces of the universe in our hands. We're all connected in ways we don't understand. And it's never too late to choose kindness over pride. In the end, Richard Morrison learned that grace doesn't come from having all the answers or making all the right choices. Sometimes grace arrives in the form of a young woman in a restaurant who sees a birthmark and shares a story about love and loss and the beauty of ordinary goodness. And sometimes that's enough to begin again.